afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish on Sunday the 10th of April. My name is Maggie Lennon and I'll start the show with the weekly roundup of the coronavirus statistics. In the last week, 43,035 new COVID-19 infections have been registered in Scotland. In the past week, 181 newly reported deaths, people who have tested within 28 days, have been recorded, and there are 4,369,103 people who've received the first dose of their COVID vaccination. 4,097,075 have received their second dose, and 3,457,690 have received a third dose or a booster. 2,252 people were in hospital with recently confirmed COVID, 23 of whom were in intensive care. And since the start of the pandemic, sadly, a total of 11,650 patients in Scotland who tested positive have died. I'm joined today by two bonny fechters, Jools Bell, Angus Councillor and current member of Women for Indies National Committee, and Anne McLaughlin, MP for Glasgow North East and a former member of Women for Indies National Committee. Good morning to you both. I hope you're both well.
Good morning, Maggie.
Morning, Maggie.
I'm going to run through the headlines of what's been happening in the last 24 hours from Ukraine, and then we'll go into the stories in a bit more detail. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned his country does not have time to wait while pushing for an oil embargo on Russia in his latest national address. He also said he's committed to pressing for peace despite Russian attacks on civilians that have stunned the world, and renewed his plea for countries to send more weapons ahead of an expected surge in fighting in the country's east. Zelensky said his country is ready for a tough battle with Russian forces amassing in the east of the country. This will be a hard battle. We believe in this fight and our victory. We are ready to simultaneously fight and look for diplomatic ways to put an end to this war. The European Commission is pledging €1 billion to support Ukraine and countries receiving refugees fleeing the war following Russia's invasion, said the Commission's President Ursula von der Leyen. The Austrian Chancellor, Karl Nehammer, met Zelensky earlier on Saturday following a visit to the city of Bucha in the northwest of Kyiv, where mass civilian graves and street killings by Russian forces were discovered last week. The Czech Republic has delivered tanks, multiple rocket launchers, howitzers and infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine, among military shipments that have reached hundreds of millions of dollars and will continue, two Czech defence resources have reported to Reuters. Boris Johnson pledged a major new infusion of UK arms and financial aid during a surprise visit to Kyiv on Saturday. Johnson said the UK and its partners and allies will provide support so that Ukraine will never be invaded again. The UK confirmed it will send 120 armoured vehicles and new anti-ship missile systems. Russia's withdrawal from northern Ukraine has left evidence of disproportionate targeting of civilians, mass graves, the use of hostages as human shields, according to the latest British intelligence reports. The reports also claim that Russian forces continue to use improvised explosive devices, so-called IEDs, to inflict casualties, to lower Ukrainian morale and restrict freedom of movement. Ukraine carried out a prisoner exchange with Russia on Saturday, the third such swap since the start of the war, with 12 soldiers confirmed to be coming home, the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister has said. A total of 4,553 people were evacuated from Ukrainian cities through humanitarian corridors on Saturday, fewer than the 6,665 who escaped on Friday. 10 humanitarian corridors to evacuate people from embattled areas across the country had been agreed on Saturday. Russia has reorganised the command of its battle operations in Ukraine, installing a new general with extensive experience in Russian operations in Syria, according to a Western official. The commander of Russia's southern military district, General Alexander Dvornikov, now leads the invasion, the source told the BBC, adding, "We would expect the overall command and control to improve." So that would imply that Russia have admitted they've been getting it wrong. There clearly have been a number of senior generals have fallen victim to the war, and things are not going as we know as Russia had planned. So the two big stories, the two big influences this week have been the uncovering of what is now clearly war crimes in several places, and also the fact that the Russians are withdrawing from certain areas, which some people are saying is a sign that Russia are really feeling the pinch, But others are more concerned that it's a sign that they're simply reorganising in order to make a bigger push in the east of the country. Anne, what did you make of the change in tactics from the Russians?
Well, I mean, nobody really knows, do they? What their plan is. I don't know if things have not gone as well as they thought it would go in terms of they haven't made the progress that they expected. I hate talking about it using positive language like progress, obviously. Um, I mean, I still feel hopeful that there will be a complete withdrawal. They'll be forced into a complete withdrawal, but I don't think that's the plan at the moment. I think we're going to see them regrouping and coming in with more offensives. But of course, that's just from everything I've read, and from conversations with other people that are a bit closer to it. But I might not be right, and I hope I'm not right.
Well, one of the other things that a few people have suggested is that by pulling Russian troops out from some areas in the Ukraine, is there a suggestion that he might be about to use other types of weapons, such as tactical nuclear weapons or chemical weapons that he doesn't want his own forces to be subject to? Do you think that's something we should be particularly concerned about, Anne?
Yes, because I don't think that there's anything that he wouldn't do if he thought it was going to get him. Not just Putin, I mean, but he couldn't be doing it just as one man, but Putin and some of the people around him. I don't think there's anything that would be off limits to him. I think what's happening here is fueled largely by his ego and his determination to win. And a lot of politics in the world is fueled by ego and the determination to be seen to be the best. So I think there's nothing much that's off limits. I'm kind of nervous about really saying that about nuclear and chemical weapons because I know that actually the impact of this war is greatest on the people of Ukraine. It's huge on the people of Russia who are, led into this by Putin. But it's also reverberating around the world and it's having a big impact on people who are genuinely frightened. I mean, I grew up with nuclear weapons, fighting the existence of nuclear weapons, fighting the existence of them across the water from where I grew up. But a lot of younger people today never even thought about it until recently. So I'm kind of nervous about talking about that because I don't want to frighten people too much. And I very much hope that he's not going to be going down that route. I've seen the result of chemical warfare for myself when I went to visit Kurdistan. And, you think things can't get any worse than they currently are in Ukraine. They could, but I hope they don't.
There's another sort of pattern emerging at the moment as well, Jools, isn't there? And that is Zelensky asks for more weapons and says the West are not doing enough. The West are very clear about being frightened to escalate things too much. And so the West gives more weapons. And that's now seeming to happen at a faster pace. So we're seeing a lot more money being pledged. We're seeing a much wider type of weaponry being sent. So we know that the Czech Republic have sent tanks for the first time. We mentioned in the headlines that Britain has been sending anti-ship missile equipment. And I believe Slovenia has sent anti-missile defence systems. Do you think there's any strategy behind what the West are doing, or does it feel more like crisis management, Jules?
It feels more like panic and crisis management to me. The only kind of thread of hope that I have in all of that was Zelensky's mention of, pursuing twin tracking, if you like, with diplomatic solutions. But remember that the other the dangerous weapon in all of this is the fifth horseman of the apocalypse, which is disinformation. I think it's really hard for people who are geographically quite far removed to tease out the truth in some of this. It's hugely difficult. And I do get absolutely the sense that the West doesn't really know what to do for the best. And that's a real struggle. And for me, it's about I would love to see ego taken out of this. And you, Anne, and I know that's not going to happen. And I think that's the only way that we're going to get any sort of peaceful resolution to that. And I know we're going to be coming on to the civilian casualties in all of this. And that's what really pains me hugely. And I know you'll share that that it's the civilian population that is suffering hugely on this, and that reverberation is being felt across the planet as well. It's just utterly heartbreaking. I am terrified to read every morning what's been happening, and I know I have to, because I have to validate people's experience in that, and I genuinely can't see a quick resolution to it. It is a terrifying situation.
Well, I don't think any of us would have expected the war to still be raging at this stage after 46 days. Certainly the Russians didn't. And I just don't think any of us thought it would go on that long with no, as you say, sign of any kind of resolution whatsoever. And while Zelensky needs to be applauded for his determination to still look for diplomatic means, there's no sign whatsoever that the Russians are in the least interested. I'm quite interested, Jules, in what you said about disinformation, because, of course, this has become a war about information as much as anything else, at least from the Russian side. We know that Russia has strict control over the media. We know that what people at home in Russia are being told is not what the rest of the world has been told. Nearly every report that comes in that we look at comes with a caveat that things have not been verified, that things can't be checked. And that's been making it quite difficult to give an accurate report. And then we had the ridiculous, or we've had the continuingly ridiculous situation where, despite quite strong physical evidence and evidence from drones and pictures from the air, that Russia is claiming that it's not been responsible for any of the attacks on civilians. But the one area, Anne, that we're not getting much information about at all is the impact on women in Ukraine of this war, because as normal, it is women who in many ways suffer most. And it's beginning to emerge the amount of sexual violence that has been used. And once again, we're seeing Russians using rape and sexual violence as a weapon of war.
And it's so common. Was that to me, Maggie?
Yes.
I just jumped in. It's so common across the world, as is war, unfortunately. And you and I both know that we need to do more for Ukrainians, but we need to do more for other people as well. There are other wars happening. If you look at the Democratic Republic of the Congo, millions of people have died. But the stories that I've heard coming from there, from people who now live here, of soldiers raping women and children, and doing it with impunity, is utterly heartbreaking. Now, I think people in the UK relate much more quickly to people in Ukraine because, and I do understand it, because they see a similarity in their facial features, they maybe dress similarly, they're part of Europe. And I think, this is where we need to expand on people's understanding of what happens to women in these situations, because people are rightly now becoming absolutely horrified at these reports that women are being sexually assaulted, raped, and children as well, by soldiers who are there in their country against their presidents, their politicians as well. And understand that that's happening across the world. So when we're, complaining or expressing concern about providing safety to other women and children, and men, of course, as well. But it is primarily women and children that this is targeted at. When we're complaining about that and saying that we don't have enough room, remember, this is happening across the world. And we are one of many, many countries. We don't have to do it on our own, but we're one of many countries, we're a set of countries that should be providing refuge to people in these circumstances. But yes, yet again, these men are taking it upon themselves to treat these women with, utter contempt. And it is just absolutely heartbreaking. And I just don't know what we do. I don't know what happens to these people to make them think that this is in any way acceptable. I don't know how they can do it. And I don't know what we do to stop it happening.
That's an interesting question. Why do people think it acceptable to use women and the sexual violence against women as a weapon of war? Why do you think that is, Jules?
Well, it's been happening since time immemorial. You can take it back to Greek and Roman times. And it's about power and control. And it's, I guess, a magnification of what happens in coercive relationships, where women are abused either physically or mentally, or both. And it's that ego thing, isn't it, about control. And it also worries me. I read something during the week about the dangers that women refugees are being exposed to in host placements. It was a report that emanated from England, and I think that's it's really important that we have appropriate screening and assessment and PVGs for host families in this country. Ukrainian women have been subject to abuse when they have thought they've been staying in a place of safety. So that really concerns me about what happens to women when they get here as well. I honestly do not know how you stop that, other than, and I'm not being flippant around this, seeing more women world leaders, which would reduce the prospect of conflict. I'm absolutely sure. We need to move towards a paradigm that is about peace and cooperation, not conflict. And I'm not in any way offering any other solution to that. I just cannot get my head around why people need to go around invading other people's countries and killing each other. I'm an absolute pacifist, and it genuinely pains me, and I know I'm not alone in that. How do we grow people to be peaceable, and taking that ego, that power, control, domination aspect out of how we nurture our young people?
Well, if we had
Otherwise,
the
we'll just
answer to
never get
that
to the end of
question,
it.
journalists would be out of a job and we would all be in a much better place. But as you've said, these things have been happening since time began. And while there is inequality in the world, of which it looks like there's always going to be, I guess there's always going to be that sense of somebody wishing to be dominant. But Anne, I know that in the work that you do within your constituency, and just because of where your constituency is, that you have a lot of dealing with refugees and asylum seekers in Glasgow. So you will be fully aware that it's not just the Ukrainian women who are at risk of sexual violence while they're getting out of Ukraine and travelling, and there's been some horrific suggestions that some of the people offering to put Ukrainian women up, both in Europe and in the UK, have really got nefarious purposes. But you'll know yourself that that is something that all women refugees face. The number of women, female refugees who have been victims of sexual violence, often being trafficked or often having to sell themselves to people smugglers in order to get their families safe, is something that you will hear on a fairly regular basis. But what really concerns me is, and this is I appreciate this question I'm going to ask you, is a huge question, and we don't really have a lot of time to go into it. What confuses me sometimes is that the UN's own refugee law and legislation isn't really gendered. It doesn't really take account of what happens to women when they're fleeing persecution or war. Would you think that's a fair criticism of the UN?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you're making, because you're absolutely right, Maggie, and you know this because of the work you do. But you're absolutely right. And one of the things that, just to talk about the Ukrainian situation specifically for the moment, one of the things I've called for in Parliament is that people who arrive here, now I've no doubt the vast majority of people offering to open up their homes to Ukrainian refugees are coming from a place of kindness and compassion. But there will be some who are seeking to get something for themselves out of it. And that is about, largely around sexual violence. And we know this because there was a journalist, and I can't remember the name, and I'm sorry I can't, because she put an advert in a paper saying that she was a Ukrainian refugee and she needed a home in the UK. And the responses she got included one man saying, I don't have a spare room, but I have a very big bed and I'm happy to share it. And so one of the things I've been calling for, and I think actually now that you've mentioned this, I'm going to call for this for all refugees, but specifically for people coming to live in a stranger's home, is that they need to know it's very difficult to get PVG checks for everyone before they come over. Otherwise, we're holding it up even longer, but they still need to be checked. But they need to know how they get help if they are even not comfortable in that home. Anything makes them uncomfortable. They need to know how to get help. They need to know that they have the right to get help. And they need to know they need to be given the confidence. You think about it. Somebody's opened up your home. You've fled a war zone. Thank goodness you're not there anymore. But this guy is creeping you out and you are very scared that something is going to happen. But you're so grateful that he's opened up his home to you and you don't want to be rude about it. So we need to do some work with the people that are coming over and saying to them, listen, it's absolutely fine for you to, and this is where you come to, this is how you get to us, and here's how we'll deal with it. Because I am really concerned about that. And as you say, even when they come and they're being taken care of by the local authorities, a lot of these women they face sexual violence where they have come from, and then they discover that the place of safety is not protecting them from that either. So it is something that we need to look at. And actually, the point about the United Nations is something I'll look at when I'm back in Parliament, because that is interesting.
Well, I mean, it's something a lot of people have been speaking about. I've certainly been speaking about it for years and years and years. There are two, if you like, additions to the UN Convention on Refugees. There's one in South America called the Cartagena Declaration, which extends, if you like, the remit of the UN Convention on Refugees to include lots of other things that aren't included in the general definition of a refugee, which are, some of them are gendered. And there's something similar across Africa as well. And I really do think it's something that needs to be thought of, because we are seeing a disproportionate number. And in Ukraine particularly, because the men are staying at home to fight, a disproportionate number of women. Obviously, the pace at which the UK visa scheme for Ukrainians is rolling out is very, very slow. That could just be bureaucracy, or it could just be bloody mindedness of the Westminster government, who knows. There's been an added confusion this week that some people who've come to the UK to stay with families have discovered that they can't actually stay with their families, because by moving in with their families, it's breaching House of Multiple Occupation legislation or rules or licenses. And so they're being thrown back on local authorities. And I wondered, Jools, if you were aware of any Ukrainians who've arrived in Angus and who are struggling to find somewhere to stay.
Not struggling to find somewhere to stay. I've had quite a few contacts from both ends, if you like, from constituents who are really keen to open up their homes, but nothing's happening yet. And I've also had contact from citizens in Angus around people who have come to stay with them through connections, and they're, financially, we all know there's a cost of living crisis. People are able to support those families, but it's a financial struggle. And when will the funding start to follow? So I've been in constant contact really with our chief executive around that, who's been chairing a regional resilience group to support the matching up and also the seasonal visa workers from Ukraine who are already in Angus, whose visas are probably still okay until about November. So she's aware of all of that, and they are looking at it on a Teesside-wide basis. But that's, again, plugging into the Scottish Government and plugging into the UK Government, and there is a hindrance there, as Anne rightly confirmed, that things are glacially slow, and there's a frustration that we're not able to help people as quickly as we'd hoped. And what's happening to those people while we're waiting for them to come here to hopefully a place of safety. So it's frustrating, and I guess I was born cynical, so I'm a bit like you. I'm a bit like, well, who's causing that? Why is it happening? And why can't we fix it? So that is a real worry.
I would echo Anne's desire that there is more help given and more information given to Ukrainians arriving in the UK. But of course, in order for agencies to provide that support, they need told who the Ukrainians are, and there is a lack of information at the moment. It's very frustrating for everyone.
Can I just
Back
say,
home
Maggie?
now, and Jools mentioned cost of living crisis. So it's something that we've been talking about almost incessantly for the last few weeks on this programme. Just in case you were ever in doubt that we're all in it together, perhaps the recent news coming from the Chancellor and his wife would prove that that is not the case at all. First of all, we heard that his wife had shares in companies that were still making money out of the Russians. Then we learned this week that she's been registered as a non-dom, which means that she doesn't have to pay tax on any of her earnings that she makes outside of the UK. She's married to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the man who writes the legislation about these things. And then, as if that wasn't enough, we also discover that for some considerable time while he was an MP and for at least 18 months while he was Chancellor, Rishi Sunak has held a green card for the United States. Anne, how widely known, if at all, was any of this about Sunak and his wife before the supposed leak?
Well, certainly not in my circles. I was quite shocked. No, I'm going to say I wasn't quite shocked. I think sometimes they get away with so much and they do so many absolutely gobsmacking things that you kind of get used to it and stop being shocked. And we need to keep being shocked. We need to keep expressing our anger. Otherwise, people will just get used to it and they'll give up. And this is utterly disgraceful. He is, I have to declare if somebody gives me a gift worth to me more than £250, quite rightly, I have to make that declaration because they could influence what I say and do in Parliament. He never declared that his wife was directly benefit. He was making policy that would directly benefit his already extremely wealthy family who were using the services here but not paying for them. And I would love to say I can't believe it. I do believe it, but it wasn't widely known at all. But I do think it's interesting because, I keep saying this, that some of the Conservative MPs, including Rishi Sunak, are terribly pleasant and they're ever so nice to talk to, right? We can't be fooled by that. We need to make sure we never allow that to fool us. Don't look at how nice they are one-to-one. Don't look at how well they come across. Look at what they do. Look at what they do. And it is one rule for them and another rule for everybody else. And I'm sickened that they can get away with this, whereas somebody who is late to sign on for their meagre 70, whatever it is, pounds a week universal credit will lose money from that. They'll be punished severely, and yet they can get away with what they're doing. It's just, it's just wrong. It's so wrong.
Jules, as a feminist, I'm sure you would agree that women's lives are their own, that they shouldn't be looked at through the spectrum of their husband, that their income is their own and all the rest. So is he right to say that his wife is a private citizen and therefore we shouldn't be looking or making specific concerns about her, that's up to her? He's very upset about the leak. He seems to be more upset about the leak than about the fact that his wife is benefiting, as Anne has said, from legislation that he's been involved in. There's a clear conflict of interest. So is it wrong for us to go after his wife in this way?
Not at all. As a councillor, I have to follow the councillor's code of conduct based on the Nolan principles, and I would have to declare any gift over £50. But actually, we've had an update of the code of conduct, and we've been advised by our head of legal not to accept any gifts. Now, the day that guidance came out, one of my constituents had passed to me via a third party a little gift of scented candles with a thank you note for having helped her. I had to take that gift back and explain to her it was inappropriate for me to accept that, and she was in tears. But our code of conduct also, and working in the council, we have to declare any financial interests of any relative or close friend in relation to any papers or decision making that comes up. So it works both ways. It's not about being a feminist, it's about that close relationship. And you've got to wonder, what is it about a job that pays 150k approximately for a chancellor that makes it worthwhile that his wife pays £20 million in tax?
Yeah, Anne, is there no due diligence done on cabinet ministers then around this kind of thing? I mean, you've just explained the rules that you have to operate by. Jools has explained hers as a councillor. These seem absolutely right. I mean, we've been down this road before with the expenses scandal several years ago, but it does seem strange. If nothing else, it seems unbelievable that nobody knew that he had a green card for the United States. I know that the SNP have asked him to produce his tax records. I guess we'll be holding our breath for that to happen.
In terms of due diligence, I think, to be honest, it's just if you're found out, if somebody reports you for having done something you're not supposed to have done. But the other thing is, I don't think his wife being a non-dom is against the rules. It's like somebody said on Twitter today, that's not illegal. Slavery wasn't illegal. Maybe it's time that we just start looking at what's right rather than what's legal. But I don't think it was against the rules. I think the green card might be a slightly different thing. I could be wrong about that. But yeah, I think it is just basically, you are trusted as an MP and as a minister. And then if somebody says, actually, they did this, then the due diligence takes place. So yeah, it's
And I
it's a
think
bit
you're
of a
right about
run.
the green card. There were questions asked of the White House press briefing yesterday from journalists asking how this could happen. Because my understanding is that US constitutional law does not allow someone who is a member of government or even an elected representative of another country to be given a green card. As the journalist asked of the White House press secretary, what if this person had been a member of the Russian Duma? Now, obviously, Sunak isn't, but you could see his point that there was a clear conflict of interest there. And I think I like your argument that it's not whether something's illegal about whether it's right or not. But one thing we've come to learn over this particular Conservative government is that the idea of something being right or wrong, they don't have the same moral compass as the rest of us, do they, Anne?
No. No, 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 they certainly don't. I mean, I have lived through the Nationality and Borders Bill, and I was on the Bill Committee, which meant 6 weeks, 2 days, 2 full days a week, poring over every line of it. And even when I presented evidence, if you look at their plans to offshore people, and I presented the only evidence that exists, and the only evidence that exists comes from Australia where they did it. And I presented evidence in person to the minister, and I said, this is what happens to children. And it's a thing called resignation syndrome, where they completely stop communicating, don't eat, they really become extremely ill. So many of them went through that. I presented that evidence and I said, now you look at that and then you come back to this parliament and tell me that that is acceptable, that that's the right thing to do. And he came back to Parliament and proceeded anyway. It's one example, but no, we have a very different moral compass on in different parts of that house. And then there are Conservatives who think, yeah, that is wrong, but this is my party and I've got to vote this way, and they do it anyway. They've got to stop doing that.
Yeah. Okay, staying with the at home for the next story, and that is the energy crisis and also the long-awaited publication of the UK government's energy strategy. Scotland's decided to withhold its energy strategy publication till the autumn. One presumes that's because we were waiting to see what was in Westminster's. Jools, I don't know how much time you've had to look at it, but if you have had a chance to look at it, what are the implications for Scotland, do you think, from Westminster's statements this week?
Well, for me, it's about riding roughshod over Scotland's reluctance to open up Campbell, for example, and just take decisions that will affect our just transition in terms of reaching net zero by our targets. And it just demonstrates all over again that the importance of independence for me, because those need to be our decisions. And I think, the current crisis, I represent a very rural area, And at a very domestic level, our biggest challenge is transitioning domestic heating from fossil fuels to renewable energies. A lot of my constituents, like myself, I'll be very open about that, are reliant on oil for our heating. And it's hugely expensive to transition away from that for families. So, we need to have total control, if you pardon the expression, around our energy, around the whole of Scotland. Nothing else will work for us. We're in the process just off the coast of Angus of getting a wind farm, an offshore wind farm is being built, which will create a huge amount of renewable energy and save about 2 million tonnes of carbon dioxide being released into the atmosphere once it's on stream during hopefully this financial year. We need to be doing more of that and less of excavating fossil fuels from under the sea. And the Westminster energy strategy is just removing control of that from us.
But you must be pleased that the plans for British nuclear, which a few people were concerned, the fact that the word British was ahead of it, that they've completely ruled out the building of any new nuclear power stations in Scotland.
Well, absolutely. I think they would recognise that there'd be a revolution on their hands if they tried that. I think our population is pretty switched on in terms of nuclear energy. And you saw what happened with the campaign to stop any fracking in Scotland. So I'm really proud of us for that. We're I think, a much more genned up and articulate nation in terms of our energy needs. And there's huge anger and frustration at the energy unit costs, the electricity unit costs as well, when people see that so much of our energy is renewable, and yet we're paying a higher unit cost in Scotland than people in London and the southeast of England. That's outrageous. And the more people realise that, the better. We need to be able to have control over our energy production and our costs, so that we can support our own population and sell any excess off down to England. It seems so obvious to me that we stand to gain financially in a market in which we are quite far advanced.
And like a lot of policy, you'll be aware that the devil's often in the detail, and often it's about what's not been said as much as what has been said. So, looking at the whole announcement around the UK energy strategy, how would you sum it up?
More nuclear, let's not bother about the environment, is how I would sum it up. I mean, again, I think it's about this whole thing about nuclear is about ego. It's like, we will have, more nuclear power stations. And incidentally, I wouldn't bank on that announcement not including Scotland to not include Scotland if we were to vote no in the referendum next year. If Scotland was to say, okay, we'll stay with the UK, I suspect one of those nuclear power stations would be being built in Scotland, and there would be absolutely nothing we could do about it.
What about planning? Surely that's an issue for planning. So they wouldn't get planning permission, surely, and if it went to judicial review, the Scottish Government would overturn it. So surely we have got something we could do.
Hopefully, but we don't have any guarantees. But we do have a guarantee, if we're independent, that nobody, none of the politicians, I mean, apart from the Conservatives, who are never going to be in power in Scotland, would want to go ahead with this. And it doesn't make any sense because it's much more expensive. It takes forever to build them. So how is that a solution? And the other thing is that we've got, such a great opportunity in Scotland. We're so blessed with resources, with natural resources. And, the wind farms, I haven't read it all, but I think part of his strategy is more wind farms and mostly in Scotland. And I understand why that is, because across England, people are saying, no, we don't want wind farms. Whereas it's been a lot easier in Scotland because I think we understand that actually this is clean fuel, and that's what we need for future generations. But apart from anything else, can I just say, when they had windmills, which is what the wind farms effectively are, when they had windmills centuries ago for the purpose that they needed them for, nobody was saying, oh, that's a horrible looking windmill. I actually really love wind farms. I love the look of them. But even if I hated the look of them, they're clean energy and we should be doing more of it. And the fact that he's wanting to do it in Scotland demonstrates that he can't convince the people of large swathes of England to do it.
Well, it's very much not in my backyardism, isn't it? There was an interesting,
Exactly.
quite a funny comment on Have I Got News for You this week, where they were talking about that very thing, that people were complaining that wind farms were ugly, and it was said, well, that's okay because they're going to be in Scotland. And Victoria Corden, who was chairing it, said that the suggestion was that now was not the time to look for energy supplies from hostile governments. Now, was that just a cheeky London-centric snide comment about Holyrood, or is that some indication that the chatting classes in London at least are beginning to finally pick up that there are real splits and divisions between Holyrood and Westminster on this and just about everything else? Anne?
Yeah, I think the latter. I laughed out loud at that, and even whatever it was, whether it was the former or the latter, I actually think the fact that they are acknowledging that it's very, very different in Scotland, but I felt it was a sort of acknowledgement that I think there is an acceptance. I've noticed this for several years now, an acceptance in the, if you want to call them the chattering classes, that Scotland will be independent. I think more people in Scotland doubt our ability to do it, and not our ability to be independent, but our ability to win a referendum. I think more people in Scotland are worried about that than people of England. I think so many people in England just accept that it will happen whenever it happens, that it's going to happen one day.
That's interesting. Would you agree with that, Jules?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get that sense. People saying, "Well, why on earth wouldn't you want to separate?" The UK government's not working for the rest of England either. And I've always said, for many, many years, that once Scotland is independent, I predict a sticky end for the UK government, and we'll end up with a more federalised model. But just to go back briefly to what Anne was saying around the wind farms, there is a lot of local resistance here to wind farms in this county. We do have some, but I think there's a lot more we can do. I like them, and I think people have forgotten or are now immune to those hideous electricity pylons that are scattered all over our landscape, because they're uglier than wind turbines, in my view. And I think the technology and the storage is getting better. So people will come around to seeing that, and I think the offshore wind farms are quite a helpful solution as well. And we've got wave power to look at and develop further as well. So using our landscape without ruining it, I think, is a definite possibility, and I can see that happening. So I'm feeling very positive about that, and yeah, I totally agree that there are so many commentators and citizens in England that think independence for Scotland's inevitable, and completely understand the rationale for it.
Well, what might or may not become a test whether it's inevitable or not are the local government elections at the beginning of May. Both sides of the independence debate are claiming, from Labour, who stand to gain some seats, and the SNP, who stand to gain some, that this will be a sort of, if you like, not moratorium, plebiscite on that particular issue. Question is really whether local politics should be about that, and we'll discuss that in a minute. But one of our reporters caught up with the First Minister at the Glasgow launch of their manifesto for the local authority, and hopefully we have that tape now and we can hear what Nicola Sturgeon had to say.
First Ministers who are here at the Glasgow launch for the council elections, do you see Glasgow as a jewel in the crown, or can Glasgow also learn from other cities in Scotland?
Glasgow is, in my view, a fantastic city. I'm proud to call Glasgow home. I represent part of the city in the Scottish Parliament, and I think Glasgow's got much to show the rest of Scotland and the world, and we saw that in the hosting of COP26. But of course, Glasgow's got things to learn from other cities across Scotland, Europe and the world as well. What I do believe is that the best future for Glasgow will be secured through continued SNP leadership. This city suffered from decades of Labour inaction, mismanagement and failure, and the SNP has started to turn that around in the last 5 years. Re-election of the SNP will provide us with the foundation to raise our ambitions for Glasgow even further.
Now, austerity is a background to these elections, of course. Has the Scottish Government gone as far as it can under devolution in trying to mitigate the worst aspects of austerity?
The SNP will continue to do all we can within the powers and resources that we have available to us. So in Scotland, unlike other parts of the UK, people don't pay prescription charges, they don't pay for eye tests, they have lower, on average, council tax bills, water bills, pay less on average for rail journeys than people in other parts of the UK. We in Scotland have also mitigated the bedroom tax, so people will pay the bedroom tax. We invest in the welfare fund. We've just doubled the Scottish Child Payment, giving the poorest people in society more money at a time when the Tories are cutting universal credit. So we will continue to do all that we can, but the key levers and most of the resources here lie in the hands of the UK government, and Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, I think, are proving themselves to be woefully out of touch, and this election is an opportunity to send a message to them that much more needs to be done.
Well, Jools, you're a sitting councillor. Is it the appropriate thing for local government elections for people to send a message to the Westminster government?
I don't think it would do any harm at all. And I think if, as an SNP candidate, if we didn't mention independence, we'd be remiss, because our support wants to hear that that's what we're working towards. And as you'll know, the SNP group in Angus is in opposition. And I think we've been able to demonstrate that as hard-working, committed councillors, we are capable, and we are also supporting officers to deliver on Scottish Government policy, despite the antics of the Tory, Independent and at one time Lib Dem coalition, which has been absolutely chaotic and inept. They've wrong-footed themselves left, right and centre, and we've been a really steady, cohesive group of councillors that understand strategic policy, that are comfortable with decision making, and that we represent our constituents and work really hard for them. So that stability is really important. People need to know that we have the potential and the existing skills and capabilities to govern competently in whatever sphere of government we operate. And being in opposition may sound odd to some listeners, but is a good way to show that. You know, it's quite, you can tell from, if you ever watch any council meetings online, you know, who the brains of the outfit are, frankly. We read our papers, we consider them, we think about what is the right thing to do here. And it's not all about party politics. It is about the right thing. So I think, you know, you're evidencing that kind of the skill, the experience, the knowledge, and the understanding about what matters to local people while we're working towards independence. It's the whole real deal, actually. So independence is important, and the more people we take along with us, because they know we can do the job, the better.
But what percentage of people do you think vote on local issues? And I mean, how many people do you think some have voted for you and might vote for you in May who are not particularly supportive of your own view on the Constitution?
Okay,
that's not the case. And how many people, how important is our local issues? And isn't that really what local government elections should be about?
Well, absolutely, but the two aren't mutually exclusive, because a lot, you know, most of Scottish Government policy is around progressive ideas that are about tackling poverty and, you know, tackling the poverty-related attainment gap, putting food in children's mouths. You know, the fact that we've got food banks in the 21st century just pains me no end. So in the last local government election in 2017, turnout in Angus varied between about 35% in the two Angus Arbroath wards, and my ward had the highest turnout at 52.9%. Can't believe I've actually memorised that. And I know that I got a lot of people voting for me who wouldn't normally vote for SNP because they knew me. And you do get that intimate level of personality politics in local government elections. When we saw the polling coming through, the provost, who is one of my Tory councillors in my ward, he and I swapped a lot of ones and twos, which is really odd. But again, he was well known, and the area of the ward where my vote preference was one, there's a lot of public sector workers, and I've worked in the local authority and the NHS, so people knew me, and they knew me from being involved in the community. So they did vote for me, and I would very much hope that that repeats itself. But in the last general election, we got a lot of votes who are non-SNP to oust the Tory incumbent. And it would be good. It'll be good to look at the results to see if we've picked up any residual votes from that situation as well.
Anne, coming back to the Glasgow situation and what the First Minister said there, and also what the SNP have released in their press statement, it is quite clear that Glasgow is really, really important. It's a minority administration at the moment. They clearly want to put that on a firmer footing. So if something was to go horribly wrong in Glasgow and that didn't happen, how damaging might that be? Given that I quite accept Jools' point that if you can, people may vote for you as an individual, but if they happen to then realise you're representing one party, it might change public perceptions of a party, but that could work both ways. So how damaging would it be for Glasgow if they don't manage to secure the city again?
Well, I mean, in terms of how damaging it would be for Glasgow as a city, hugely. It's been an absolute joy to now be working as an SNP MP with SNP MSPs and SNP councillors, albeit in a minority, but leading the council. And, you can get things done that you could never get done before because there was so much intransigence. There were so many blockages when Labour were in charge, not least blocking those women in their equal pay claims, which the SNP Council settled. I don't think we are going to have a problem because whatever you might see occasionally on Twitter or whatever, what we're hearing on the doorsteps is exactly what we hoped to hear, that the SNP Council has changed the way the council operates and has, so, the manifesto launch yesterday demonstrated that we have so many plans and ideas. And I don't think people want to go back to what we had before, where, like, for instance, in my constituency, the beautiful public halls of Springburn disappeared on the 27th of December when nobody was expecting it and nobody knew it was going to happen. It just disappeared altogether. Now there's a real approach in terms of community empowerment and community consultation and really getting the communities to decide what matters in their area. And people feel empowered by that. And they feel empowered enough to sometimes be going to the door of the SNP Council and saying, you better get this sorted. And they're quite right. They're absolutely right. Democracy works always. But in terms of what Jools was saying, I think it's really important for us, our councillors, in terms of leading up to the independence referendum. In the last independence referendum, you voted for who you trusted. Will I vote yes? Will I vote no? Who do I trust? The messengers here, who do I trust? If we understand that we can trust our SNP councillors because of the different way that they approach the work, then we are far more likely to get people voting yes because they see that we do things differently. And they see we do things differently with one hand tied behind our back. What will Scotland look like when we are free of that and able to make our own decisions about just about everything? So I think it's crucially important. I would encourage everybody, they need to register to vote by the 18th of April and then get out and vote on the day.
Trust and politics are not words that you often hear in the same sentence, not certainly on this programme, I have to say. That's often because we're talking about what is happening in Westminster. So on the subject of trust, how far do you think people can trust Labour not to form coalitions if they're in that position? Because Sarwar has said that will not happen, although I don't believe that's actually party policy. That's certainly his view. So do you think that's true? Will they agree not to form coalitions, or will the thought of power and keeping the SNP out be too much? Anne?
Well, this might be interesting for you both, but Angus doesn't have a single Labour councillor.
Well, then you comment on that, because then you won't offend anyone.
Wow.
Well, I honestly, if we were to get even one, I would be quite surprised. They came last in my ward the last time. I think the Greens have a better chance this time round, and that's still potentially quite challenging. I would love to see a Green councillor in Angus, I'll be honest. But you know, if we're talking about one or two Labour councillors, I mean, I don't think they would have the strength in numbers to be able to stand up to their national leadership. And most of the Labour voters in Angus have switched to us already. It's really just a pretty small, hardcore minority.
And what do you think? Do you think we can trust them not to form coalitions?
No, no, no. They've said it before and then they've done it. And to be honest, so there are many fine people in Labour and the Labour Party, don't get me wrong. And particularly in Westminster, I work with some really fantastic Labour MPs, but they're frustrated because they can't do the things that they promised they would do, because their leadership changes it. And basically, the leadership of the Labour Party in the UK decides for everybody. It doesn't matter what an Sarwar says, and he needs to understand this. Keir Starmer is in charge. I have a lot of time for Keir Starmer on a personal level, but basically they will do whatever it takes. He was asked the other day, apparently, did he think it was okay for people to have their energy switched off by energy companies? And he said yes. Apparently, didn't see it myself, heard about it. You know, they will do whatever it takes. That again is ego. That again is about we need to be seen to be as strong as the Tories, as strong as their word, not my word. So no, we can't trust them. They'll just do whatever it is they think will get them votes.
Well, it will all come out in the wash, no doubt. Her final story is taking a view of an election in a different country, and that's France. Today, the first round in the French presidential elections have opened. And rather surprisingly, given that for a couple of years ago, the far right were beginning to be written off in France, it looks like the race between Macron and Le Pen is going to be extremely tight. One of the reasons for this may be that Le Pen has decided to drop their long-standing policy of wanting France to withdraw from the European Union. And that has made a lot of people think, well, we might just give them the vote because we don't want to be out of Europe, but we like the rest that she stands for. So at the moment, Jools, Macron is ahead in the polls, but it was within that margin of error. If you were a betting woman, what do you think might happen?
Oh crikey, not a betting woman. I mean, I've been looking at what's being written, and you know, when times get tough, I don't understand people voting to the right. I genuinely don't get that. I mean, I apply to my principles. You know, when I'm driving and I get lost, go left. I would always go left. You know that, and that's an overarching principle of my life, thanks to my dad and my modern studies teacher, really. So I don't understand that. I would really love to see the further left wing candidate pick up votes, people who are struggling. I would hope that Macron will hold ground, and if he loses it, it goes left. But I would hate to see Le Pen get in. That would be very worrying. So I'm not going to make a bet because I don't.
Anna, are you surprised that Marine Le Pen seems to have come from not quite nowhere, but I would have said a year, 18 months ago, she wasn't exactly a busted flush, but the right seemed to have taken a bit of a pounding. So are you surprised, especially given that Macron has been really playing the statesmanship card over Ukraine?
Which is what I think will save his neck, to be honest. And I only want to save his neck because I don't want her getting in. But I'm not that surprised. I've not followed it closely recently, but having followed French politics in recent years, I'm not that surprised, but I don't think they'll do it. I think Macron will get back in again because at times of war and global stress, leaders tend not to be changed in elections. But who knows?
Well, unlike our system, it's quite a long process. It's only the first round. There'll be no decisions necessarily, definitive decisions made by the result today. We expect it to go to further rounds. I'm sure we'll be covering that as the weeks unfold. I'd like to thank you both for joining me today. It's been lovely to have you on the programme. Just a shame you're both virtual, and I know that you were tweeting, Anne, that meant you don't get any soup. I have to say, it's been some time since I've had some soup when I've been on the programme either, so that's something to bear in mind. But thank you both. And it just leaves me to wish the rest of you a good Sunday, and to end, as we always do, with a reminder that this is public service broadcasting, and unlike Channel 4, we don't have any adverts, and unlike the BBC, we don't get given a big fat cheque from the government. We rely on the support of individuals to keep the station on the road and playing out. So if you've enjoyed today's show, if you think there's a real need for independent journalism in Scotland, then why don't you consider giving a regular donation to the show? The link is on the screen just now. In the meantime, thanks again to my guests, and to you at home, have a very enjoyable Sunday afternoon. Goodbye.